This week we're going to be taking a look at the Sixth Commandment, where God lays out his expectations for us as the men and the women he created us to be, and for his gift of marriage. The Sixth Commandment says, "You shall not commit adultery." What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we lead a sexually pure and decent life in what we say and do, and husband and wife love and honor each other. So, what is God exactly commanding us here? As we work through this, it's important to remember that God is using this commandment to protect some of his greatest gifts to us. Our identity as either males or females, as men or women, and the gift of marriage, where he joins men and women into a lifelong union. In fact, a union so close that God himself says, in marriage, the two people, the man and the woman, become one flesh. They share one identity, one future, one life together, so that you can't even completely think of them as two independent individuals anymore. And in that vein, God commands us to lead a sexually pure life. See, sex is actually a very good gift of God, but it's reserved for the marriage union. Because in the act of sex, we literally join ourselves physically, emotionally, and on many very deep levels with the person we engage in sex with. In fact, the union created by sex is so close and so tight that it is simply an expression of our life as husband and wife, and should only take place as God designed it within the relationship of a husband or a wife. And that's what he means by saying sexually pure life is we treat other women or men, depending on what we are, as either a boy or a girl, in a way where we reserve our sexual desires, our sexual acts, and our sexuality for the partner God gives in marriage, if he so chooses to give us a partner in marriage. And that goes hand in hand with God commanding us to lead a sexually decent life. That is to say, we should order all of our relationships with other men and women along this idea that God gives us our sexual identity and the gift of sex to be something that takes place within the relationship of marriage, where he joins a husband and wife. So, to put this in more simply, it means that I, as a man, should look at other women who are not my wife as women who are not my wife. I should only look at the woman who becomes my wife as my wife. And so I should not have sexual desires for other women. In fact, I should respect them as women who God does not give to me as a spouse, but who he plans to possibly give to someone else as a spouse. And so I should control my thoughts, my desires, and my acts toward every other woman in a way that is decent and respectful of the woman that God actually gives me as my wife. And this goes whether I'm married or single. If I am not married, then again, I treat all other women and men as people God has not given me. Likewise, I should treat only my wife as the woman God has given me for that unique and special relationship. Now, the Sixth Commandment actually isn't simply about sex and our sexuality. It's primarily about how much God honors and commends to us his gift of marriage. This commandment is all about how husbands and wives are to treat each other. We are to love and honor our spouse. That means we are to be devoted to our spouse and to our spouse alone with the kind of love that exists between a husband and wife. I should only look at my spouse not only as my sexual partner, but as my life partner, as the one with whom my destiny is bound up. as the one who takes absolute priority above all other human relationships. In fact, God even lays out in Genesis that in marriage, a husband leaves his father and mother to be united with his wife, so that the relationship in marriage even becomes more important, and higher priority than the relationship between a parent and a child. And so what God is commanding is that husband and wife continue to hold on to each other, to cleave to each other, to devote themselves to each other in this way, and respect each other as God's gift to you. This means, on the one hand, that God expects husbands and wives to share that marriage bond their entire life, to enter it with the understanding and the commitment that they will forsake all others and only hold to their wife as long as either person lives. It also means that they will treat each other with respect and understanding. No doubt, because of sin, husbands and wives do disagree and even fight. But husbands and wives should always be willing to bear with each other, confess their sins to each other, and forgive each other, because that is a union that is irreplaceable. And so again, the summary being, honor your spouse above all others, treat only your spouse as your spouse, and do not treat any other man or woman as though they are your spouse. That's how you lead a sexually pure, a sexually decent life that honors your spouse. So if that's what God's commanding, what is God forbidding in the Sixth Commandment? Well, basically, a good summary is he's forbidding anything that goes against the marriage union, or looks at it and treats it as of less worth than it is, or that goes against our identity as men and women. So one thing God very obviously forbids, the commandment itself states this, is adultery. In case you don't know what adultery is having sex with somebody who is not your spouse, cheating on your spouse with someone else. That goes completely against the union God creates between a husband and wife, and so God absolutely forbids every and any form of adultery. He also forbids divorce and remarriage in most cases. That is to say, divorce, which is people deciding that they're going to end their relationship in husband and wife, is a sin against this commandment, because God intends marriage to be a lifelong union. Like Jesus himself says, what God joins together in marriage, let not man separate. The only time that Christ says that divorce is a possibility is when your spouse commits adultery against you. If my wife were to sleep with someone else, then I would be allowed, though certainly not required, to divorce her. I could, and indeed I'm encouraged, to try to forgive her and continue marriage with her. Remarriage is the same kind of thing. God creates a husband and wife for a lifelong union. To divorce is, of course, to go against that union. To find another spouse after a divorce is, again, mankind's way of saying that they are completely and finally rejecting the union God made between the first husband and wife. It is very directly something that Jesus and Paul say goes against God's command. The only case where that's possibly something appropriate is, again, if your spouse has been unfaithful to you. But it's not just adultery, divorce, and remarriage that God is forbidding in the Sixth Commandment. He's also forbidding any mistreatment or any neglect of your spouse, anything that does not show love and honor for your spouse. So even if a husband and wife remain married, and never cheat on each other, they might be breaking the Sixth Commandment simply by not treating each other well. If, for instance, I always complain about my wife, I dislike her, I never can get along with her, I am breaking the Sixth Commandment, even if I never cheat on her and never divorce her. By the same token, if I know what she needs, and I know what I'm supposed to do, but simply fail to do it, I'm breaking the Sixth Commandment by neglecting her. Now, this doesn't only forbid the problems that happen when a person is married, it also forbids us to have sexual relationships with anyone other than my spouse. So, premarital sex, that is to say, sex outside of marriage, is forbidden in this commandment, because if I'm having sex with someone, I am committing myself to them as their spouse. To have sex is to join in the one flesh union with another person. And so to treat them as though they are not your spouse while entering into that union is again breaking the Sixth Commandment. But you're probably also picking up that this covers a whole lot more than overt sexual acts. Jesus is very clear when he explains this commandment in Matthew that even impure sexual thoughts, desires, or deeds are being forbidden. Even when you're imagining having sex with someone who isn't your wife, you're already treating that woman as though she was your wife. You're treating her in a way that you should only treat your spouse. This also includes God forbidding homosexual acts. That is, where men join themselves to men instead of to a woman. Or, again, if women join themselves sexually or have sexual thoughts and desires for other women rather than for only their husband. And by the way, it's important to say, it's not even heterosexual thoughts, desires, and deeds that are impure are forbidden. It's not just homosexual ones, not just men to men and women to women, but a man who's lusting after a woman who isn't his wife, that is, desiring to have sexual relations with her, is breaking this commandment just as much as a man who tries to marry another man or have sex with another man. This also forbids incest, that is, sexual relations with close family members. It forbids sexual abuse, things like rape or molesting people against their will, touching them in ways they don't wish to be touched. It forbids using children for your own desires. It forbids pornography. After all, pornography are images that are designed to make you have sexual thoughts and desires for people who are not your spouse. Pornography is evil and against God's commandments, whether you're married or unmarried. And again, we've already talked about lust. Lust being imagining or desiring sexual relations with somebody who isn't your spouse. Basically, it also covers every other kind of abuse of our identity as a man or a woman that God gives us. These days, it's important to say that that includes denying the gender that God has given us. Transgenderism, the idea that I feel like a woman even though I am a man created by God as a biological male, that's going against my Creator who gave me my identity as a man. And it also is a breach of this commandment. So you can probably tell that the Sixth Commandment is one that is really hard to keep. You could be tied in a closet most of your life and still break this commandment because you would still be capable of having thoughts, desires, and deeds that you shouldn't. But it is a very important commandment because following this commandment gives us the fullness of the gift of the love that we're supposed to have between husbands and wives. And it gives us the freedom of treating other men and women as the full and dignified human beings God has made them to be.